About 3 o'clock the afternoon of the crucifixion, Jesus gave up the ghost and died. The next day was the Passover Sabbath, which began at sunset, which was about 6 o'clock that evening. Since the Jewish people did not allow dead bodies to hang on crosses during the Passover, and the beginning of the Passover Sabbath was only 3 hours away, there was no time to lose in taking Jesus' body down from the cross and getting it buried. To hasten the death of those crucified, soldiers will often break their legs, so they broke the legs of the two thieves. But when they came to Jesus, they saw that he was already dead, so they did not break his legs. However, one of the soldiers thrust a spear into the side of Jesus, and when he saw blood and water flow from the wound, he knew that Jesus was dead. While all this was happening, the few who remained at Calvary, including Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the Less, and Salome, the mother of James and John, were overwhelmed with deep sorrow. They watched and waited in helpless misery. Work had to be done quickly in order to get the body of Jesus buried before sunset. Joseph, a secret disciple of Jesus, had gone boldly to Pilate and received permission to bury the body of his Lord. Joseph was a very wealthy and respected member of the Jewish community. Up until this point, he had not declared his belief in Jesus because of fear of the Jews. Joseph was assisted by Nicodemus, another rich member of the Sanhedrin. Nicodemus was the same man who had earlier come to Jesus by night to learn that he had to be born again in order to go to heaven. Nicodemus evidently had also been a secret follower of Jesus, but now he bravely came forward so that all could see that he was a friend and follower of Jesus. The men gently lowered the body of Jesus, wrapped it in fine linen cloth, and carried it to the tomb. The new tomb or cave hewn out of the rock was located in Joseph of Arimathea's beautiful garden near the hill where Jesus had been crucified. They watched of his dead body and wound around it strips of white linen cloth saturated with ointment and spices of myrrh and aloes. A separate piece of linen cloth, a napkin, was put around the head, as was the Jewish custom for burial. Since the tomb had never been used before, evidently Joseph had made it for himself and his family. A large stone slab was outside the entrance to close up the rock tomb, or sepulchre, as it was often called. After the body was wrapped in linen cloth and the smaller cloth put over the face, they rolled a huge rock slab in front of the entrance and returned to their homes. What a dark, sad time that was for those who loved the Lord. All their hopes were gone, and their hearts were filled with despair. Jesus was dead. What would they do without him? Now they had nothing to live for. With Jesus dead, the enemies of Jesus rejoiced. They knew where he was buried and went to Pilate, urging him to place Roman soldiers outside the tomb to guard it, because they remembered that Jesus had promised, "After 3 days I will rise again." They told Pilate, "His disciples will probably go at night and steal his body and hide it and tell everybody he's risen from the dead." So Pilate ordered soldiers to guard the tomb. Jesus' enemies apparently thought they could keep Jesus in the grave. To them he was dead, buried, and locked in a rock tomb with soldiers guarding the tomb. Weren't they ignorant and foolish to think that they could lock God into a tomb? Very, very early on Sunday morning, the day after the weekly Sabbath, while it was still dark inside the cold, damp tomb, the most wonderful thing happened that has ever taken place in the history of the world. Jesus Christ arose from the dead. He went right through the grave cloth, leaving them behind the way a butterfly leaves its cocoon. He left the grave cloth in the shape of his body like a shell, lying on the stone surface in the tomb. Suddenly, as the day began to dawn, the earth shuddered and quaked. The quake seemed to shake the whole hill on which the cross stood. The Roman soldiers guarding Jesus' tomb jumped to attention. It seemed as if the whole world were reeling and trembling. Inside the tomb, Jesus stood up, removed the napkin from his face and head, folded it neatly, and laid it down where his head had been. He had risen from the dead, never to die again. He won the victory and conquered sin, Satan, death, and the grave. All of his enemies were defeated. Jesus left the tomb in his risen, glorified body. Instantaneously, in resurrection power and glory, he went right through the rock entrance. There was a blazing burst of light, and a dazzling, beautiful angel appeared from heaven. His face shone like lightning, and his clothing was a brilliant white. The angel rolled back the great, heavy stone covering the entrance to the tomb and sat on the huge rock door. The soldiers were terrified of the angel, and they fell on the ground in a dead faint. As soon as the soldiers came to and recovered a little from their fright, they fled to Jerusalem to tell the religious leaders. The religious leaders bribed them to tell a lie, so the soldiers told everyone, "While we slept, his disciples stole the body away." But of course, only those who did not want to know the truth will believe that lie. For how can men know what is going on if they are asleep? In those days, people brought spices and ointments to honor someone who had died. Today, we send flowers in honor of the dead. The group of faithful Galilean women who had remained at the cross and later had watched the burial of Jesus had prepared perfume, embalming spices, and ointments to bring to anoint the body of Jesus. Before sunrise on that first Easter Sunday morning, Mary Magdalene, Salome, Mary the mother of James, and other women were coming to the tomb in Joseph's garden to put these ointments on the body of their beloved master. As they walk along in the semi-darkness, they walk about the problem that was worrying them just then. They ask themselves, who will roll away that big stone from the door? We will never be able to get to the body of Jesus. As they came within sight of the grave, suddenly they stopped. Something had happened. In the early light of dawn, it looked as if the huge stone covering the entrance had been rolled aside. It had. To their surprise, the tomb was open. They could hardly believe their eyes. What could this mean? Mary Magdalene must have run back to tell Peter that the tomb had been opened. The other women went closer. They saw that the Lord Jesus' body was gone. They stood there, very puzzled, when suddenly an angel appeared before them, clothed in a shining robe. The women were terrified. The angel asked, "Why are you looking for the living among the dead? He is not here. He has risen, as he said. Come, see the place where the Lord lay, and don't be afraid. Don't you remember that he told you when he was in Galilee that he must die, but that he will rise again the third day?" With this reminder, the woman remembered Jesus' words. "Go your way," the angel said. "Tell the disciples and Peter not to be sad, not to grieve anymore, because Jesus is alive. He has risen from the dead. You will get to see him, for he will go before you into Galilee." Filled with joy, but trembling from excitement and awe, the woman hurried from the tomb and headed back to Jerusalem. What a story they had to tell. Finally, panting and out of breath, they found the disciples. Everyone tried to talk at the same time. "We have just come from the tomb. It is empty. Jesus' body is not there. And we saw an angel that said he is alive." The disciples would not believe them. It's hard to know what the disciples were thinking, but the Bible tells us that to them, all of the chatter of the women seemed to be just a bunch of words. We can only imagine what they might have said. "Now calm down and try to tell us what you're talking about," the man must have said. "But it's true, the woman cried. "We saw an angel ourselves, and he spoke to us. He told us we will get to see Jesus." But Peter had already heard about the empty tomb from Mary Magdalene and had left, followed by John. Peter and John rushed to check this out for themselves. They ran all the way. John, who was younger than Peter, reached the tomb first, but he didn't go in. Soon Peter arrived, probably exhausted and gasping for breath, and he went right in. Then John followed Peter into the tomb. Both men looked at the linen wrappings. They noticed that nobody had cut away the grave clothes or unwound them, and they couldn't have stolen his body. He went right through them and left them in the shape of his body. Then they noticed the napkin, folded neatly and placed where his head lay. Thieves would not have done that. John was convinced that the Lord Jesus had risen from the dead, and John believed. Soon afterward, Mary Magdalene returned alone to the tomb and stood outside crying. Apparently, she had not stayed with the woman long enough to hear the angel's message, and so she did not know that Jesus was alive. As she wept, she stooped and looked in and saw two white-robed angels sitting at the head and foot of the place where the body of Jesus had been lying. "Why are you crying?" the angels asked her. "Because they had taken away my Lord," she replied, "and I don't know where they have put him." Just then, she glanced over her shoulder and saw someone standing behind her. It was Jesus, but she didn't recognize him. Very gently, he asked, "Why are you crying, and for whom are you looking?" Thinking he was the gardener, the man who watered the flowers and tended the garden. "Sir," she said, "if you had taken him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will go and find him." Jesus spoke only one word to her. He called her by name. "Mary," he said. She turned towards him and fell at his feet. "Master," she exclaimed. "Go quickly," Jesus said. "Find my disciples and tell them that I'm going to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary was beside herself with joy. She knew now that what the angel had told her was true. She had seen Jesus herself. She had heard his voice. He was alive. He had risen from the dead. Mary Magdalene rushed to find the disciples and told them, "I have seen the Lord." What a thrill to see the living Lord. Mary Magdalene was among the first to see Jesus after his resurrection. John had not seen Jesus, but he believed that Jesus was alive. Today, you and I have not seen him, but as Christians, we believe that he does live. As a result of Christ's victory over death, we who belong to Jesus have never to be afraid of death or dying. We never have to be afraid of the grave. We can praise him in our hearts and say, "O death, where is your sting? O grave, where is your victory?"